NBC 10 News starts now.
Right now at 11 a.m., awaiting a verdict. Good morning to you once again. I'm NBC 10's Lucy Bustamante. The jury in the Derek Chauvin case is deliberating as we speak. And just yesterday, they got two very starkly different messages from the defense and the prosecution. So what could be going on in the jury room right now? NBC 10's Miguel Medina-Valle, you actually spoke with the legal expert, Miguel, about the issues that the jury is considering right now. There are three counts they're looking at.
Yeah, that's right, Lucy. And we know that the jury has been sequestered since yesterday. So they're going to stay behind closed doors until they reach a verdict. And right now they're going back and forth between two main arguments. The defense saying Chauvin acted as any reasonable officer would, and the prosecution saying Chauvin's actions went against his training and caused George Floyd's death. So former officer Derek Chauvin, he does face three main charges, as you said. Second-degree murder. Prosecutors there have to prove his actions were a substantial factor in Floyd's death. Third-degree murder. Jurors have to believe Chauvin acted recklessly without regard for human life. And finally, second-degree manslaughter. The charge with the lowest burden of proof. Jurors have to decide if Chauvin's negligence created unreasonable risk. Well, attorney Enrique Latoison told me this morning that the jury could potentially come to a consensus on just one or two of those charges. Those charges would then come forward, either guilty or not guilty, and then the prosecution would have to decide whether they would want to try the charge the jury is hung on in a different trial. Latoison tells me that the greatest challenge for the defense has been to prove Chauvin acted like any other officer would, especially since so many of his fellow officers testified against him.
I don't think that you've seen such a consensus of police officers all joining together to say that this is wrong and this is not what's taught and this is out of bounds. You notice the defense was not able to get any actual police officers that are actually police officers right now to testify for Officer Chauvin. Believe me, if they could have, they would have.
And we've already heard talks about appeals, with the defense citing Congresswoman Maxine Walters' words over the weekend asking for a guilty verdict as grounds for that appeal. But while the judge said her comments could be used to appeal, he also said he believes the jurors are following orders and not watching the news. So our attorney doesn't think an appeal would happen. I'm in the newsroom. Miguel Martinez-Valle, NBC 10 News.
Interesting take there. Thank you so much, Miguel. Well, the troops, they are ready in the streets of Minneapolis, as you can see here. The city and much of America are very worried about what would happen when the verdict is announced. Protesters are calling for social justice. And look at this. Hundreds of high school students briefly walked out of class. This was yesterday in Minnesota in a show of support. Well, no one knows when the verdict will come, but businesses in Philly are boarding up, and they want to be prepared for any looting that's similar to what we saw last summer. Take a look.
Right now, people are scared.
A big Philly with a heart in it right there. You see spray painted. This is at the AT&T.
All right, now to the other big story we're following this morning, the Derek Chauvin guilty verdict and the reaction to it.
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon put out a message just before the Tonight Show started last night. Let's take a listen.
The courts did their job and justice was served. And while this is a step in the right direction, there's still a lot of work to be done. Too often, justice isn't served, and the need for police reform remains. We all must continue to call out injustice until things change for the better.
The Sixers put out a statement, too, saying in part, quote, while the outcome of the trial may deliver a sense of relief, it will not bring back the life that was tragically taken. We know that full justice will only be achieved with systemic change. And the murder trial of Derek Chauvin lasted for weeks. The jury deliberations, though, lasted only, 10 hours or so before he was found guilty on all the charges.
Yeah, we want to bring in our legal expert, Enrique L1 Latoison. Right now, Enrique, thanks for being here. The jury deliberated, again, about 10 hours. Here's the thing. They asked no questions.
Right.
Is that normal?
I was very surprised in a case like this that they didn't have any questions. These were very complex charges here. You had a unintentional murder, which was the second-degree murder, which was the intentional act of the aggravated assault but the actual led to an unintentional killing. And then you had the third-degree murder, which was like a reckless killing, but you had a heart of malice or depraved heart. And then, of course, you had the manslaughter second degree, which also was like a reckless negligence behavior. And I do believe in the closings that the prosecutor and the defense actually put up a lot of slides, and they kind of showed what the elements of these crimes were. But, they deliberated about 4 hours the first day and about 5 or 6 hours the next day. Was very quick, as far as I'm concerned, without any kind of questions, which kind of means that it was a big consensus here on exactly how they felt. And they came back, all three charges, not guilty. I mean, guilty, excuse me.
Yeah. Enrique, the prosecutors, they called dozens of witnesses. The defense only had a handful of witnesses take the stand. The jury didn't hear from Chauvin himself. Do you think that affected the outcome?
Well, the prosecution went through many different witnesses. I like to call it three phases. They had your witnesses that were there at the scene, and then they moved towards the officers, the use of force, the training, and then they ended the third phase with the experts that talked about how George Floyd died from the lack of oxygen. Now, the defense, they just basically went right to their experts. They really didn't have anything building up their case there. I believe that, they didn't have that many witnesses. They probably were not able to really find people to testify with the theory that they had. In the end, it was an overwhelming amount of evidence with all those police officers testifying against Chauvin, and it worked just the way the prosecution wanted, and they ended up exactly where they wanted to be. It wasn't a split verdict. It wasn't a hung jury. It was all guilty, all charges.
NBC 10 legal analyst Enrique Latoison waking up early with us this morning. Enrique, always good seeing you.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for taking the time, man.
Thank you.
All right, pedaling down the street 1 second and handcuffs the next. This video of a teenage bicyclist being arrested in New Jersey is causing quite the stir this morning.
You rode past me.
Nobody heard you.
Get off the bike, dude.
Wait, let me search your phone.
Get off the bike.
Let me search your phone. Wait.
Get off. Just take their bike.
The video apparently shows Perth Amboy officers confiscating bikes from a group of teens and arresting one of them. But this part of the edited video shows what police say they were reacting to. Teens behaving badly on bikes, all while riding right past police cars headed in the opposite direction. Police did give the bikes back, told the teens to have fun the right way.
All right, turning to the weather now, 6:18, 57 degrees. So
I think it's the right call because he sat on that man's neck for a little too long, being an officer. Like they say, you're supposed to protect and serve the community, and he heard it.
I am very, very happy he got convicted for killing that man.
Tell me why.
Because George Floyd didn't deserve to be pinned down like that for that long. It's the way I see it. We all bleed red. Everybody's equal. That's nonsense.
I am a peaceful person, and I want peace for our country and for all humanity. And this has been really a difficult year, and I just hate seeing us so divided this way. So I'm hoping that this helps us. We need to heal. We need to heal, or we're going to hurt each other horribly as a country.
Now, coming up at 7 and through the night, we're going to have much more reaction to this verdict, but for many we spoke with today, a clear sense of relief. In the newsroom, Danny Freeman, NBC 10 News.
All right, Danny, thank you. And we know this was a long trial, nearly 3 weeks, but a relatively swift verdict. Again, Chauvin found guilty on all three charges.
For perspective on how the jury may have come to this conclusion and what happens next, attorney Enrique Latoison joining us now. Enrique, prosecutors have the highest burden to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We've spoken to you numerous times over the last year about this. With the case presented from both sides, did you anticipate this would be the outcome each hour that they went on and deliberated? A lot of people were becoming uncertain.
Well, it's very hard to predict juries, and if you start doing that, you're going to disappoint yourself. So in this case, there were three charges. You had one that was the lowest charge, which is the manslaughter. You have the second degree, the third degree murder, and you had the second degree murder. So I believe that the evidence was really strong in this case. The prosecution had that video. That video was the strongest piece of evidence. As they said in their closing, a 9-year-old who was sitting there watching it called the police, when they're watching what took place at that time. So So I thought going into it that, it definitely was going to be manslaughter and it definitely was going to be a third degree. I was wondering what was going to happen with the second degree. Now, you got to remember this jury can take notes, unlike in Pennsylvania. They can take notes. So they took notes throughout this entire trial and they went back. They asked no questions. I was surprised they didn't ask any questions. They didn't have any clarification questions. It took 10 to 11 hours and they came back guilty of all charges.
So as far as what comes next, we know sentencing is set for 8 weeks from now, but there are certain procedural events that have to happen first. Walk us through what happens next.
So in Minnesota, what they do is they have a Blakely motion, which is the prosecution and the defense will submit a memo within the next couple of weeks. The prosecution will be asking for aggravating circumstances, and the defense will be going against that. His guidelines are 12 and a half years for a person who's never been convicted of a crime before, which is Officer Chauvin, and who's facing these charges, 12 and a half years. The prosecution is putting together a motion, the Blakely motion. They will have that argument in front of the judge to decide whether or not aggravated circumstances do apply in this case, which could push the sentencing up to 40 years for the most severe charge.
And we didn't see much reaction from Derek Chauvin, although much of his face was covered with a mask. People always looking so closely to see what that initial reaction will be.
Well, I believe he was prepared for this verdict. I mean, I'm sure his counsel had him ready for the worst case scenario and being ready for his bail to be revoked, what took place in this case, and he was taken right into custody. I'm pretty sure he was prepared for the worst case scenario.
All right, Enrique Latoison, L1 Latoison, thank you so much for your perspective throughout this trial. We really appreciate it.
See you soon.
And our coverage of the guilty verdict in the George Floyd case and Derek Chauvin trial continues at 7 o'clock.
Coming up next, NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt with full coverage from Minneapolis. The outcome of this case tonight, guilty on all 3 counts. Jacqueline and I will see you back here at the top of the hour. Have a good evening.
Breaking news tonight, Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer found guilty